Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is my session, Talk Nerdy to Me, translating technical jargon into plain speak for the rest of us. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for coming out. I know it's early on a Friday morning, and hopefully all of you have had coffee. So, before we get started, here's a bit about me. My name is Lee. This is a safe space. We're all friends. Currently, I work at FFW. I've been there for several years now. I'm a marketer. I'm on their marketing team, and my job title is Senior Marketing Communications Manager. Effectively, what that means is that as part of my work, I touch just about everything in our organization that has to do with words that people read. And so quite a large portion of my job is working on case studies and translating technical content that developers give me so that our clients, who generally are not developers, can understand what the benefits of various technical solutions are. Before I came to FFW, I worked at the Drupal Association. While I was there, I did work on their marketing efforts as well, but I also had the job of telling stories about the human side of Drupal. I would talk to people about the ways that they had changed their lives by adopting Drupal, whether that was from an organizational standpoint or from the standpoint of somebody living in, a tiny town in Africa and making their lives much better through web development. So I'm here to help you. If you get stuck on a word problem, you can always ping me on Twitter. I'm very frequently online. My user handle is Lee_can. Lee can help you. So what should you expect from this session? We're going to go over a couple of things. We're going to talk about what communication actually is, what that process is. We're going to understand what communication barriers are and how we can identify and reduce them. We're going to learn how to get to know our audience, how to connect with them better on a more human level. We're going to learn how to clarify our language, and we're going to look at pictures of cats. So let's get started. So, communication. What is it, and how do we get better at it? Can somebody tell me what communication is? Don't be shy. Communication. Yeah.
Conveying any message to someone else.
Great. Any other definitions? Like, is sending a cat GIF communication? Yeah. Like emoji strings, interpretive dance. Those are all kinds of communication. So communication, the definition of communication is the act of transferring information from one source to another. It sounds really simple. It's actually a very complicated process. So there are four components to the communication process. A sender, a receiver, a channel, and a message or feedback. And through that process, several things happen. There's the process of encoding, where the sender translates abstract thoughts into language or into motion in the example of interpretive dance. And not just encoding those thoughts into language, but then maybe physically writing it down or saying the words out loud. That is the encoding process. You have your channel. That is the way that you're communicating. So it could be speech, it could be a written email, it could be a presentation, interpretive dance. That is where you send the message effectively. And every channel also comes with at least one barrier, which we're going to talk about more in just a minute. After it passes through the channel, the message is decoded by the recipient. And so that's where they're taking the message and they're translating it back into concepts that they're familiar with. And then as this is happening, feedback is also consistently occurring. Feedback is not always verbal. It can be nonverbal, like people, like body language, people being hunched over or nodding along, or sending back a long string of emoji. If you sent a text, that is valid feedback. Or no feedback at all, that's feedback too. When you send an email to somebody and you get nothing, that's a kind of feedback and it's scary. So barriers. When you're trying to say something and somebody just does not get it, it's not because they're dumb or because you're bad at explaining things or any of the other silly reasons that we like to superimpose atop people that we're upset with. Communication breakdown happens because there are problems with barriers. So around every channel is a kind of invisible barrier. So it could be a physical barrier, like a small screen. It could be a psychological barrier, like somebody's trauma or personal hang-ups. It could be a comprehension barrier where you have a lack of understanding or shared language. It could be a cultural barrier, somebody not paying attention. It could be a barrier of disability where somebody has vision issues, deafness, blindness, cognitive disorders. I mean, the list just goes on. So with all of this in mind, clear communication means using the right words with the right people in the right medium at the right time for the right response. It's about anticipating any barriers that you may encounter and adjusting your message or medium accordingly. For example, if you try to explain something very complicated using exclusively emoji, you're going to have a problem, right? But if you take the time to write up what that message is, maybe that you use bullet points, maybe you actually sit down with somebody and talk them through and allow them to ask questions, you're gonna have far fewer problems. And that's just an example, very simplistic, but still an example of identifying the right medium at the right time for the right response. So to communicate clearly, you need to understand your audience, including any barriers that they may have around the channel that you've chosen, and you need to choose your channel and your words appropriately. So, reducing barriers. How do you do it? You have to be aware of the different kinds of barriers first. Obviously, the biggest barrier for us in the agency or Drupal world is that we oftentimes do not have a shared knowledge base with the people that we're speaking with. When you start talking about hooks, maybe they think you're fishing. When you start talking about rules, they think sports. But that barrier of technological knowledge is actually a problem with encoding and decoding because you don't have that shared vocabulary, you don't have that shared language. You would not talk in Chinese to a client who does not speak Chinese. It's the same basic principle. So I've included a couple of other different examples of encoding and decoding problems that cause these barriers around the channels. Like I said, these can include different values, different cultural habits, different ways of thinking, human error such as inattention. And I want to point out that encoding and decoding problems are especially potent across cultural barriers. So, for example, there's American English, and then there's British English, and then there's Australian English, and then there's a bunch of other different kinds of English. But specifically in American English versus British English, there's this word that I hate. Scheme. The word scheme in American English means like some sort of underhanded, sneaky trick plot thing, but in British English, it just means a plan. And so this is an example of somebody talking about a scheme, and you go, wait, whoa, this company is scheming? Like, call the authorities. No, it's just a barrier, it's fine, everything is okay. And so that's an example of just one encoding or decoding problem. The other big bucket of barriers are issues with the medium. So this could be the wrong medium for communication, like when somebody gives you a long spiel and you just completely lose what they're saying immediately. It could be like an impairment that prevents you from fully engaging with the medium in the way that somebody else anticipates. You could interpret a dance, for example. It's beautiful, but it is not an ideal medium for communicating what Drupal is. So if you want to ruminate on the tragic beauty of death, go with interpretive dance. For anything else, consider an email. So back to the communication diagram, we're going to have an example now of a barrier and an encoding-decoding problem. In my house, I do most of the cooking and meal planning, and this is a communication breakdown that happens every few weeks. Some days my husband wants something specific, but he doesn't want to ask me to cook dinner, or he's hungry, or whatever. And I never really know where he's coming from when he says the following words. What are you thinking for dinner? And so in this instance, he has said these words aloud, and I hear them, and I decode them with all the baggage that I have with me. So maybe I have had a really bad day, and I'm really grumpy. And I interpret this as Jordan hinting that I should make him dinner, and that is just wrong, and it will not stand, and I don't want to cook. And so my feedback gets encoded as rage, and I scream at him, make your own damn dinner. And he was just wanting a pizza and doesn't understand why I'm so upset. So this is a classic example of an encoding and decoding problem, or marital problem, take your pick, and it's exacerbated by a barrier. In this case, the barrier is assumptions, the assumptions that we carried with us into this conversation. So neither of us did a particularly good job at coding our message or our feedback, and we were unable to filter them effectively through the barrier of speech, because we both had assumptions about what the plan was for dinner that night. So a better way of communicating could be that I, as the recipient, take a moment and go, maybe there's a barrier here. Maybe I take a moment to pause and digest my reaction and say, okay, I'm assuming something, but maybe I shouldn't. So maybe I should ask or say, I don't want to cook. I hadn't given it thought. I don't want to cook. Do you have something else in mind? Now, of course, the best version of communication is the one that completely reduces that barrier, where Jordan, as the message sender, the instigator of the communication, says outright, as clearly as possible, I really want pizza. Can we get a pizza? Do you have other plans? And I go, oh my God, yes, let's get pizza. I don't want to cook. It's great. It's pizza time. Everybody's happy. There's no fight, no strife. This is just an example, again, of identifying those barriers around the communication channel and reducing them. It does take effort on behalf of both parties. You know, and there is a chance maybe that he's going to say that and I'm still going to fly off the handle because I've just had a really bad day. But when we find the clearest possible phrasing or communication style for the message or the channel that we're in, generally those barriers are vastly reduced. Now, another important part of this is knowing your audience. So things do work a little bit differently when you're talking with a client versus with somebody who has promised in front of all of your friends and family to love you and put up with your nonsense forever. So when you're navigating communication with people that you don't know as well as your spouse, how can you identify those communication barriers and how can you navigate them? You start with two questions. One, how can I phrase this in terms this person will understand? Two, how can I talk about this in a way that will make them care? And I have this asterisk here because it's really important. You have to not be condescending. And sometimes we come across as condescending anyway. But it's something that we have to be really cognizant of when we're trying to phrase things. We don't want to oversimplify. We don't want to make people feel reduced. We have to talk about it in a way that will make them care, using terms that they'll understand. And so coming at it from that approach of putting them first, as opposed to, I'm going to make myself look smarter, is one great way to avoid the condescension trap. To answer these questions, you have to think about who you're talking to. This is a riff on some of the tools and techniques that we use in marketing land, and we create things called personas, where we come up with like, okay, this user wants to do these things, he's trying to accomplish these tasks. Funnily enough, you actually don't need all of that much information to answer these questions. It's very simple to extrapolate just from basic conversations. So you need to know what they're doing, what are they trying to accomplish, what's getting in their way, what do they want, what do they value, what's going to make them a hero, what's going to make them a loser. And you also need to try to find their barriers. So that's identifying, do we have a similar background? This could be cultural, this could be professional. Do we speak the same native language? Do we speak the same work language? Do we have that shared vocabulary? Is this the best medium for this person? This is one that takes a little bit of trial and error because sometimes you send an email to somebody and you think that you were super clear and you get something back from them that's completely garbled nonsense. That's something to trial and error be aware of. You need to be aware is this is the best message or medium for the message that I need to share. Back to the interpretive dance thing, don't do it. And is this message structured in the right way for this medium? And so that can be something like, am I speaking briefly or do I need to go into more detail? Do I need to have really short lines in my emails or do I need to have long paragraphs? So you have to find those barriers. Again, sometimes it does take some trial and error, but the try bit is the important part. Don't worry about the errors, just get up and keep going. So we're going to have an example scenario. Jordan Anderson runs a nonprofit living history museum outside the city of Austin. It's a primarily volunteer-based operation, and they have contracted you to build them a new site. Now you understand that this place's main sources of revenue are from field trips and from special events. And you also know that Jordan and his office staff are not particularly computer savvy. You find all this out in the course of maybe making the bid or being hired to do this work for them. You know that they have a low operating budget, and while you're building the new site, maybe during the planning phase, Jordan says something like, I spend a lot of time sharing information about bookings. There's nowhere for visitors to see if dates are blocked out. I have to call all of my volunteers individually to ask them if they can work events or trips. Some days I spend so much time coordinating events that I'm not able to get maintenance done. It's a big problem. So we know a whole bunch just from this short series of, 4 sentences? We know that Jordan needs a better way of sharing information about events. What's he doing now? What's he trying to accomplish? Well, he's trying to run a nonprofit property, he's trying to manage the volunteers, and he's trying to manage the event booking. He's trying to keep the lights on, and he's trying to keep the doors open. That comes back to the revenue thing, but he's also trying to keep the property safe and clean because he was talking about not being able to accomplish basic maintenance tasks. The things that are keeping him from doing it is that he's spending way too much time calling people. You know that he values a quick information dissemination. You know that he wants to save time in dealing with inquiries with volunteers. And you know that he doesn't want to do the same task over and over again because most of us don't want to. We know that he wants to do his job instead of answering the same question or having the same conversation 1,000 times. And that he's going to look bad if he loses money on these tasks, if he has to pay through the nose for this website, or if he gets stuck with a platform that he can't use because he's not technical, his staff's not technical, so they need something really simple. Now we need to find his barriers. There's a few other questions, but I went ahead and I left them out because we're going to focus more on those sorts of things in a few slides. For the purposes of this exercise, we're going to look at just how we're going to talk to Jordan. So, do we have a similar cultural background? I'm from Austin, he's from Austin. We're good. Professionally, no way. So he's not going to speak my work language. He's going to speak my native language, but not my work language. And is this the best medium for him? Is the information that I'm about to give him, that we're having in this conversation, is this really the best way of speaking with him? And I have noticed, just over the past couple of days of communicating with him, that he seems to respond better to verbal communication than to written ones. There seems to be a lot more clarity there, so I'm going to keep my explanations spoken as much as possible. So, with all that in mind, we know Jordan needs a way to streamline his communication process so that people making inquiries about site availability can see online that the venue is booked, and we need a way for volunteers to get notifications that they're needed on site. Jordan doesn't have a lot of money to spend on this project, and he needs a solution that will save him time and doesn't require a lot of technical expertise to use. So, how are we going to solve this problem? We're going to phrase this answer in terms that Jordan will understand, and we're going to talk about it in a way that will make him care. And we've identified how he's going to understand it and what he cares about. So we're going to tell him, we're going to build you a solution that lovely blue checkmark text is good, X text is bad. We're going to say, when you make a calendar event, you can select whether it's a tour or a special event. We're not going to say, we're going to build you something that uses an API to connect to your site and your calendar. It's going to be really nice. You're going to have this automated workflows and these rules. Like, you've lost him. So you stick to this simple text and you put it in terms that resonate with him. You speak to his needs and talk about how the solution is going to save him time and make him look like a hero. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's precise, it's awesome. So, high five. So, the important thing to note about the example that I just used is that it values the clarity of information over the depth of information. Whoop. Oh no. I tried to do a thing and I broke it. But it values clarity over depth. So you're not going into a whole bunch of detail. Instead, you're focusing on what is this going to do for you? Why is it going to help you? And so that why is the important thing here. To find clarity, you have to run a workshop with your inner 4-year-old and ask, why? What's that mean? Why? Over and over and over again. So, you did something smart. Good job. But nobody else seems to care that you did something smart. Why is that? It's because they're all asking, what's the point? Why does this matter? So you have to ask why until you have the most basic possible answer when you're trying to showcase how brilliant you are or communicate clearly. Take your pick. Now there's some variations on why questions that are really useful, such as what? What does the thing do? And why did you do the thing? You don't want to go to the how rabbit hole. You don't want to go, how does the thing work? That's different from what does the thing do. You know, you can say, well, it sends information back and forth through the internet pipes. Like, okay, that's more of a how. Like, what does it do? Well, it shares information between your calendar and your website. You want to avoid technical language wherever possible and find a concrete, real-world reason for doing what you did rather than an abstract one. And so we're going to go through this exercise. It's going to be super fun. So this is an example from real life. I'm not going to read it out loud yet. We're going to go through it in a minute. But this is from a transcript of a call that I had with a developer at FFW. And I've actually already condensed about 6 paragraphs of text down to this one thing to fit on this one slide. So bear in mind that this is already extremely simplified. And we're going to take these 4 paragraphs of text, of very technical text, and condense it down to a few short sentences of explanation that even your grandma can understand. But as a non-technical person, when I take a look at this and I see like cache invalidation, CDN, URLs of live state features and purge to the hosting providers, my reaction is, I want to run and hide. It's scary. Technical terms are really scary to those of us who can't understand it. So when you as a technical person are trying to communicate with somebody who does not have that shared language, you have to start by finding the most important info. So as a group, together, we're going to pretend like we're in 8th grade and working on a research paper, and we're going to find our trash and treasure words. So the most difficult feature was a cache invalidation solution. Okay, that's what this is about. It's about cache invalidation. We rewrote a time-based cache expiration to give us a good cache hit ratio. Okay, but that means to do that, when a page changed, we'd remove the documents from cache. So we're avoiding the how, avoiding all of this how text in the middle, and we're going to just start focusing on the why. So we'd remove the document from cache when a page changed to give us a good cache hit ratio. To maintain referential integrity, this seems important, so we're going to bold it. We added a cron job that would look for a live state change. And if it found one, it would send a purge to the hosting providers. And all these things together made a site that felt like it updated in real time. So we've taken this whole chunk of text and reduced it to this, a simplified version. Much clearer already. We've already stripped out a lot of the detail that sort of confuses the point, and just the important things remain. It gives us a pretty clear overview of the work that was done, but there's still a lot of technical information that the average Joe or Jordan or Lee probably won't understand. So again, we're going to ask, what's the point? What's the point? So what is the point? We're going to break it down. We're going to ask those why questions. We built a cache invalidation solution. What does that mean? Well, from what we just read, it makes the site go fast. Why? Because it was a big streaming event and we needed to have updates as they happened. Like, okay, that makes sense. So we built this thing to do this stuff. We wrote a time-based cache expiration. Now, what does that mean? That means that the pages, instead of updating themselves, we made it happen as infrequently as possible. Well, why? Because it's a really big site and updating every page constantly would slow it down. Okay, that makes sense too. We're following. So this is a good cache hit ratio. Okay, what the heck is a cache hit ratio? Well, it determines how fast your site loads for people. Oh, okay. Continuing the breakdown. When page change, we remove the documents from cache. Okay, what does that mean? When someone changed a page, we'd pull it out from where it was stored, and then, to keep from accidentally breaking the site, we had a special program, instead of cron job, special program, that would update or swap out any old pages with new ones instead. So, it's all pretty much the same content, just the words are slightly changed. So we have this simplified version now. Because it was a large streaming event, yada, yada, yada. So even though the site wasn't actually refreshing every single page constantly, it still felt like everything was being updated in real time. Here's why. This makes sense. It's clear, it's understandable, it still talks about the technical work that you did, but without using those technical words. And this is a really great exercise to run before meetings with clients so that you can have the language and the vocabulary ready to explain the solutions that you did. So, you've done this exercise, you're in the meeting, and the client says, how'd you make the site go so fast? Now we're going to take a moment again to think about barriers. Do they have a similar upbringing and background? Do they speak my language? Is this the best medium? These are all things that you hopefully know the answer to by now if you've been working with them for a while. But it's a good thing to go through your mind and say like, okay, this person does not respond well to long soliloquies. This person tends to drift with their attention, so I need to keep it short and sweet. And so when they ask, wow, how'd you make the site go so fast? You take all that information that you just distilled and you say, we gave a really, really long shelf life to each page. Most pages were only updated on their own every few hours or every few days. We built a special program that was constantly checking for changes. When a page changed, the program would go in, pull the old page, put a new one in. It's really clear, it's really simple, and it still gets the point across. The client says, that's so cool. How did you do that? And you say, well, do you know what a cache is? You have to check for that comprehension, that language. Do you know what a cache is? And they say, nope, and lucky you, you get to do it all over again. It's gonna be great. So, we're gonna try the exercise one more time. So, this is another example, again, from a transcription of a call that I had with somebody in FFW. Now we're just gonna go straight for the simplified version. Trouble with an underlying system architecture. Site was serving a ton of digital assets, lots of users. It wasn't able to keep up. To solve it, we separated Drupal from the file content and used Amazon Web Servers. Okay, we're close. So back to this 4-year-old again. What's that? Why? What's that? Why? Okay, we were having trouble with the system architecture. That means site wasn't built right for the job it was being asked to do. It was being asked to serve up a lot of content, like a lot, just like a brain-breaking amount of content for most people. And the files were too big to store in the site itself, so we had to find another place to put them because things just were not working. To solve it, we separated Drupal from the content and stored it on Amazon Web Servers. Okay, that means that the files were too big to store in the site itself, so we had to find another place to put them. It's the difference between keeping all your papers in a pile on your desk or keeping them in a filing cabinet. So you run this exercise, and then the client says, how'd you get the site to stop crashing? And you say, well, I have this very simple explanation, and let me give it to you. And the client says, that's a really great explanation. How did you do it? And you say, do you know what this thing is? Checking for language. And they say, nope. And you say, what's the point? It's not what you say. Basically, you give them an analogy. You say, it's like a filing cabinet. There, sort of. So, you all may be wondering what's the point of all of this horse flogging that I'm doing about clarity. This seems like a really long, really convoluted process, and wouldn't it just be easier to say all the technical content and like if they understand it, great, and if they don't understand it, they're impressed because you're so smart. It is a long process, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually second nature and it becomes very easy. When we communicate clearly, we build better relationships with the people who are around us, with our clients, with our coworkers, with our spouses. Even though you can't account for every potential barrier in interpersonal communication, it's really good to try, because if you do, people will do their best to meet you halfway, usually. Sometimes they don't, sometimes it's terrible, but you can try. So, clarity and kindness really do make everything better, and that really is at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here. So with all of this in mind, does anybody have questions? We have plenty of time for Q&A, and you're not going to scare me. And nobody's going to think you're silly. So, questions?
We sort of have a situation where we have a managed website platform here. I work for UC Berkeley, and it's sort of a thing where folks have to opt in and pay for it, right? It's not just free, and the whole idea is it's fully managed, so if you're not a technical person, therefore we take care of all the heavy lifting for you. But getting people convinced that this is a valuable thing can be difficult, right? Because they sit there and I think they think like, well, what's so complicated about this? And we know that it's actually really, really complicated.
Right.
So sometimes it's about, I feel like, if we're trying to get them on board to the platform, we almost have to talk a lot of technical speak to make them understand, like, this is actually a really complicated web, and here's why. But then once they're on board, then we like really simplify as much as possible, especially with like our how-tos and documentation. And I'm kind of just thinking out loud here, but I'm wondering like, what would be the best way to meet in the middle as far as the opting in or getting them on board process of like making it clear that there is so much technical fine-tuning and complicated stuff, but also making it making them understand how complicated it is without like talking over them or overcomplicating it, I guess.
Yeah. So that is an excellent question. That's one that we deal with a lot in marketing land, about how to impress people with the fact that things can be really technical and really difficult. The best thing that you can do is to go back to what are this person's needs? What are they trying to accomplish? What's going to make them look good? And so instead of, I mean, you can of course hit them over the head with the technical information, and like if that's an effective communication strategy, then like stick with it for sure. But you can also point out, you know, look, if you do it this way, you're going to be spending a lot of time. You're going to have, you know, a whole bunch of financial overhead. You may need to hire somebody to do this on their own. You might have to train them. And instead of talking to the technical components, you speak more to like the personal problems that they are going to experience, or the departmental problems that they're going to experience. And you focus on like the human side of the technology, because technology without people is just a bunch of circuits and wires and switches. And so you talk about like, what is it actually going to accomplish, or what is it not going to accomplish when you do it this way or when you do it that way. And so again, you speak to the needs, you speak to the pain points, the things that they're struggling with right now. Because ultimately, if they want to do it themselves, they think that there's a problem that they want to solve, and maybe the problem that they think that they're solving is not actually the problem they're going to solve, and they're going to create a different problem. So you have to just identify, like, what are they trying to do, and how can I help them understand a better way of doing it? Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
Okay. Also, comprehension checks, very important. You ask, did that make sense? Does that answer your question? This is another important communication strategy for reducing barriers around that feedback loop. More questions? Yes.
I am a software engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to help by communicating clearly.
Yes.
But it looks like this process takes time. And how do I justify spending time on it when that's not in my job description?
It's not? Like,
No.
so
I would say it's not.
So the thing that I'm trying to get at here is not that it's should or shouldn't be in your job description to take time, but that you're going to be better at your job if you're an effective communicator. Because it's not just about talking with clients, but even with the people around you. Even with the people who maybe do have that same shared vocabulary. These are techniques for just improving all of your communication. And so it does feel like a really long process, but fortunately, I've given you guys resources to help you in your communication journey. We have the Sideways Dictionary, which Ricardo here found for me. It's a dictionary of analogies, and you can just look at them and sort of understand how people are putting together explanations. Or you can look at the Communication Skills Toolkit. But ultimately, if you even just focus on one thing, and all these slides are going to be online, by the way. But if you even just pick one thing of like, okay, maybe this sprint, I'm going to focus on whenever I ask somebody a question, I'm going to really like listen to their feedback, and I'm going to try to understand what they're attempting to accomplish. And if you just pick one skill at a time and work on it iteratively, you know, it can help. But I totally get it. It does feel like it's a big time sink to work on these communication tasks, but it's like any sort of job training. You're going to get better at what you do. You're going to be more effective at your job if you can communicate clearly. And so if you can find, and you don't even have to do all of this at work. You can do some of it when you're like talking to your friends and explaining what it is that you did at work today. Like, what did I work on? Well, you can talk about the technical side of things, or you can say, I built a thing that makes it quicker to do the stuff. And go for the why instead of the how. why not how? Is that a helpful answer? Would you like me to give you a time turner? Would that help?
How much time does it generally take once you're practiced at it?
Not long. I can do most of this in my head, but I also do it for a living. There are quite a few developers at FFW who have built a habit of doing this. You know, not under my counsel. That would be just too much. But the more that you do it, the easier that it gets and the more naturally it will come to you. And so even if you just spend 5 minutes trying to figure out how to explain what it is that you did, the more time that passes and the more feedback that you get from people about like, oh, that really made sense when you explained it that way, it clicked for me. It will help you refine your own communication strategy. It's like learning any new thing. You have to practice, but eventually it does come pretty naturally for many people. Everybody's different, but I'm confident that you can master it. So I'm not a software developer, and so I bow down before your brains, but I can do this, you can do it.
I also feel like it makes your product better if you're the developer behind it and you're able to sort of bridge that gap, right? Because then you start to really understand what the users need more when you're throughout the development process.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, being able to understand not only what you built, but what the real concrete, like, human reason is for the thing that you built is going to make you a better developer, better designer. More questions?
Do you have any favorite resources as far as like best practices for constructing documentation for a product? Because that's obvious, it's a slightly different medium than if you're interfacing with a customer, speaking or otherwise. But like, and there's obviously questions of like general UI and whatever. But I'm always interested to hear if there's resources I haven't explored yet.
I don't do documentation. I cannot answer that question for you in any sort of truthful way. However, I do have friends who do documentation, and I can ask for you. I'm happy to do that. I think that documentation follows the same basic principles of what task are you trying to accomplish, and like what does the tool do to help you accomplish that task. So, but yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I haven't gotten that one before. Thank you. Maybe I'll add some documentation slides.
Is it documentation for technical folks or not?
Well, both. I would say probably we make it as non-technical as possible because we have both types of users. So, but it's the how-to on how to actually use our platform to build your website. So, I would say we try to make it as non-technical as possible, and then the technical folks are able to follow it as well in that regard. So,
Writing for the lowest common denominator.
yes. Thank you. That's a good way of putting it.
Yep. More questions? Marco. Yes.
So you're the process. You gave a couple examples with the process, and like for each thing, you go, okay, why? What does that really? I'm trying to understand how long does this take at the beginning when you're starting out trying to implement this strategy?
Yeah, well, it depends. It changes from person to person. And there's a big assumption in this presentation that you understand what the pain is that you are building or creating something for. That you understand, or that you have a solid foundation of knowledge for why you're putting the thing together the way that you are. You know, not just from a technical perspective, but what the challenge is that you're trying to solve. And so if you have that information, it takes a couple of minutes, but you can, set aside 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour if you're really feeling intimidated, and take a step back and say like, okay, the client is having these problems, what does this do? How does this speak to those problems? I'm trying to find the slide. So, like, what are they trying to do? I understand what my client does. I understand what their business is or what their product or service is. I understand what they're trying to do. I understand why we have been hired to help them, or I don't understand. And that's when you ask those questions. You can ask a client, you can ask your colleagues, but you're not going to be able to find a useful answer if you don't initially at least have this knowledge of what the problem is that you're solving. And once you have that, like I said, it takes a little while at first, but it does come much, much easier the more that you do it. Like riding a bike or playing a ukulele. Does that answer your question, or would you like me to talk in more circles? Yes?
So I'm generally speaking more on the client side of things at my university, but I'm just technical enough that I seem to serve as translator between vendor and non-technical folks in my office a lot.
Congratulations.
What seems to always happen is the vendor says, "Oh, good, you understand this," and there's your bureaucracy past them. So how do I get them to slow down and talk to me on the level that I can comprehend?
You turn into a 4-year-old and you ask, "What's that?" and "Why?" And it's never a fun thing having to do that and say, like, "Wait, hold on, like, back up. What does that mean? What does that do?" Because I have to do that a lot in my conversations with the developers, and I oftentimes feel like, kind of dumb. But this comes back to that final slide of, like, if you're really trying to meet people halfway, usually they will do the same for you. And so you can tell them, I understand what you said when you were talking about the cache invalidation solution, but then you started going on about CDNs, and can you fill in my knowledge a little bit there? I'm not sure quite what it is. And so you just help them understand where your vocabulary is lacking, and hopefully they will be good friends and compensate for that. Helpful? Okay. More questions? No? Well, thank you for coming. There we go. Thanks for coming out. Again, you can find me on Twitter if you need me, and I will make sure that all these slides are uploaded to the website. So thank you.